Okay, I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, especially since I did my master's in his lab. But I was thinking about it, and I think the only conflict of interest right now is I want to stand up here and tell jokes, and it looks like he just wants me to get through this. So, yeah, have a seat. This will take a while. Dr. Steve Helms Tillery received his PhD in neuroscience from the University of Minnesota, which we've already heard a lot about this morning. Today he joins us from Arizona State University, where he's a newly tenured associate professor in biomedical engineering. He's the principal investigator of SMORG, and no, that's not a Swedish dish. It stands for the Sensory Motor Research Group. The research group's main thrust is neuroprosthetics, specifically the development of neuroprosthetic hands. Among human and rodent experiments, this involves recording from the brains of monkeys to control computer cursors, as well as stimulating their brains to deliver semblances of sensation. Now, as you can imagine, this research is not without its controversies, ranging from the use of non-human primates to the potential outcomes of the developing technologies. Dr. Helms Tillery, however, is exactly the type of scientist you want leading such work. His thoughtfulness extends from experimental design to the ethical issues associated with his research, and that's why he's with us here today. He's been active in collaborating with colleagues in ethics to write and present on pet topics such as resource use and the value of ethics education, both inside and outside of the classroom. We're very happy to have him with us today as he discusses the costs and benefits of translational research. All you.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephanie. I didn't catch the joke. So I'm here to give some kind of meanderings about things I think about as an investigator in terms of subject protection, in particular subject protection. And so the main subject I've worked with over the years is monkeys. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we protect monkeys, and then eventually we'll come to some humans. I started this, it was a while ago, a long time ago. At the University of Minnesota, well, it wasn't that long ago, it was 25 years ago. I was taken to a hallway when I was a new graduate student by my professor, Tim Ebner. He walked me down into the basement of Deal Hall. So is Deal Hall still there? Okay. So Deal Hall is one of the old buildings on campus, and in the basement of Deal Hall was, probably still is, the medical library. So, and Minnesota it's a cold place, and so they're the golden gophers, you know, and so they actually tend to live underground. The medical school is, it's got these tall buildings, but underneath is a warren of tunnels that go between all the different buildings. You can come in off of the main street that bisects the campus called Washington Ave, and there's stairs down to the tunnel, and then there's a long tunnel that goes, I don't know, it's 400 or 500 yards down. And at the end of that tunnel is a branch. One goes to the hospital, and the other branch goes to the medical library. And so you're already downstairs, you go to the medical library, and then there's off in the corner a little staircase that goes down even further, down to the basement. And down in the basement, you open up a door, and you see something that looks a little bit like this. I guess it doesn't really look like this. I just drew this with PowerPoint. So. So you come down the stairs, you enter this hallway. There were no special protections at the time, just a door that opens, and a nice clinical environment with blue ceramic tiles everywhere, and some doors that went off to various labs. And so I was shown into this room that's labeled SHT, and it was a big empty room, and I was told, you know, there you go, come back in 4 years when you have enough data for a dissertation. I'm not joking. Actually, and further down the hallway was another room that was filled with old equipment, and they said, you know, here you go. You find what you need, and just get to it. And so there were some other people doing research with monkeys in the hallway here. Some of you may know Kathy Ojikangas. So she had a lab a couple doors down where she was doing her dissertation. And then down the same hallway, this is just a hallway in the sub-basement of the medical school, was this animal holding room. There was nothing special about it. Didn't have special locks on the doors, didn't have an alarm system, didn't have anything like that. And I was trained to go down the hallway to the animal holding room, and I had a special animal. This is This is my first monkey. This is Froderica. And I would go down the hallway, and I had trained Froderica to put her arm outside the door. And she'd put her arm out the door, and I'd take her by the hand and then walk her down the hall to the lab. And I'd put her in a little chair there, and then she'd play around with the robot. And we had recorded from somatosensory cortex while she engaged in tasks. And as you can see, the environment for me interacting with this animal was really casual. So I didn't have PPE on. I didn't have any weight either. So I didn't have any special restraints for the animal. It wasn't that uncommon to be walking down the hall holding the animal's hand, and somebody would, the door would open and a medical student would come by, or some lost person who was trying to find the medical library, or there was an animal rights group who used to sort of stroll down the hallway once in a while. And the animal, if the animal was startled, she would just jump up on my shoulder and just sit on my shoulder, and so I'd walk her down to the lab sitting on my shoulder. When I was done with the experiment, so she would sit in the chair and work, and I'd record her brain signals. And when we were done, I didn't walk her back to the room right away because I had some data to analyze, so I would unlock her from the chair here and just let her run around. I had sort of monkey-proofed my lab, so the monkey would run around the lab, and yes, there were monkey poop stains on my ceiling. And I kept a little pile of monkey treats right beside my computer where I worked. And when the monkey was done running around, she would come and sit down and eat the treats, and then that would be my cue to take her back to her cage, back in the homeroom. Okay, so that was just sort of routine handling. We didn't think much about handling the animals. There were occasional bites and nips and stuff like that. That happens, and still happens. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then when we were ready to do procedures with these animals, we had another room elsewhere in the medical school, and I would actually carry the monkey and anesthetize the monkey with a shot of barbiturate of some kind, carry the monkey down to the surgical suite, do the procedure on the monkey, which would involve, opening the cranium and putting on a chamber, and so we could drive electrodes and all these kind of pieces. And our monitoring of the animal's anesthesia basically consisted mostly of doing a pinch reflex. So every 5-10 minutes, somebody would reach down and pinch the monkey's foot, and if the animal didn't react, he was or she was still anesthetized enough, and if there was a little reaction, you give a little supplemental dose of barbiturate or ketamine, something like that. Okay, and then so for recovery, we would do all the sort of usual things you would do with these animals. Give them some kind of analgesic for a couple days, treat them with lots of fluids and all that kind of thing, and then eventually bring them back to the lab, usually 2 or 3 days later, and the animals would get back to work. Okay, so for those of you who've been in monkey labs still, things have changed pretty dramatically over the last few years. This is working, right? Okay, so for example, we have a whole new way of handling animals now. So most people in monkey labs have procedures where the animals wear some kind of a collar, and we'll have a pole system like this, so you can reach in, stick a pole into the cage, clip the animal's collar, carry the animal off to your lab, put them in a chair, or put them in a chair in the room, do the work with them there. Animals would live in cage systems like this. And I took this off of a study I found online of the effects of caging on animal behavior. And so I want you to keep this in mind, because this was published in 2000, and it had some comment about living in the bottom row of cages was bad for animal behaviors. Okay, so we've sort of modernized the handling of animals. We wear, in addition to sort of handling them a little more carefully, we also wear PPE. This is from an article from your own institution about protections of animals. And so you can see that the investigators are wearing full Tyvek suits, so they're waterproof suits to keep the whatever sort of horrible monkey things they might catch off of them. They're wearing gloves and masks and hats. And this is really standard now in handling for monkeys, and there's really a couple reasons for it. But the main reason these days is because of the existence of a virus called simian virus B. And simian virus B in humans is extremely dangerous. It kills 70% or so of the people who get infected with it. And so we take extreme measures to make sure that we don't get infected. And there's problems with sort of testing for simian virus B, making sure that the animals don't have it. However, in the 50 years or so that we've been watching simian virus B, there have only been about 30 cases. So even though if you catch simian virus B, you're going to be very sick, the expectation of illness is really quite low because the probability of getting it is very low. So it's very rare. So the handling of the animals has been changed dramatically. And then of course we also have with IACUCs and regulation now huge changes in how we treat the animals surgically. So instead of taking them down and giving them a dose of phenobarb, we intubate the animals, we treat them with isoflurane, we give them perioperative drugs to manage the pain, to manage infection, those kind of things. We monitor the animals very carefully during surgery, so we use the same surgical monitoring techniques that we'd use in a regular surgery with a human. We're monitoring blood gases and expired gases and heart rate and in some cases EEG. And so this is like a full-on procedure. Okay, and it costs a lot more. And in our discussions with IACUC, we have to explain in detail why we're doing each parts of these procedures we do. And so the question which I have, which is, it's clear that in making these changes for the animals, that we've made things better. So the animals recover from the surgeries better than they used to. They probably have a lower pain. We measure pain index. Our pain index on our animals is inevitably 0, so we don't have signs of perioperative pain for the first 2 or 3 days after the surgery. They're probably healthier. They're better cared for. And so that's all good. I would say that we've done some of the right things by these animals. But we have a committee at Arizona State called the Research Incident Response Team, and this is, I don't know what this committee is supposed to do, protect against terrorism or something. But the main thing which always gets discussed is animal rights. So what happens if the animal rights people come to ASU? And it was a really vivid moment for me where we were discussing this, and one of the people was saying, you know what we need to do is we need to have a series of documents and press releases. And one of the things that should be in a press release about the animals is that we should say that our animals here at ASU, or these animals here at Northwestern, are healthier than they would ever be in the wild because they're getting all this great medical care, they're being taken care of, right? And that's true, that's totally true. But I don't know about you, but my bullshit detector really goes off when I hear that. And the reason for that is because, well, I don't know about you, but for me, if I had a choice of having really good medical care, living in a cage in my lab, or running around on the cliffs of Yosemite and falling off and breaking things occasionally, I'm pretty sure I know which one I would choose. So somehow it seems like some of the protections that we've introduced for these animals don't really necessarily address the core central issues that these animals have. So my impression as an investigator over 25 years now is that when you look at the animals operatively, perioperatively, there's not a whole lot different than when we used to give them a dose of phenobarb. So they're doing pretty much as they were doing as well 20 years ago when I handled them without my PPE, and I carried them on my chest sometimes, and took them to the lab, and when the animals get upset, I could groom them. I could go in there and, they don't have nits because they're in the lab, but I could go through their hair and pick nits off their hair and have all these kind of social interactions with the animals. And now, when I'm interacting with an animal, I look like this. So the animal can't see my face. I can't really touch it with my skin. That's all banned. So all that kind of interaction has been taken away. We've given them better surgical care. That's good. I'm not going to fault that. But the question I have is, what is it that we're really protecting with all these kind of long series of regulations? I mean, we've made the research with the animals more expensive. We've made it more time-consuming. And it's not all that clear to me that, except for like small incremental changes, that we've really done things to improve what goes on with these animals. So this is my own kind of meanderings as an investigator is to try to understand what's being protected. It seems to me that a large part of what's being protected here is the public's view of what we do. Because the research that we do is almost completely, and I don't want to contradict Dr. Elliott, but you know, the large proportion of the work that somebody like me does is funded by taxpayer dollars. So everybody in the room here is contributing to my research, and everybody across the states is contributing to my research. And I think it's important that we be able to answer to those people and talk to them about what we're doing. And the truth is, for the kind of research that we do with animals, we're given enormous latitude in what we're allowed to do. So I could never do any of the stuff that I do in my garage. And you guys, I don't know if you guys know about Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Arizona. Well, one of the characteristics he has, he's got lots of them, but one of the things he has is that he's a big fan of animal rights. And so he hates animal cruelty. So I can be pretty sure that if I were to be doing some of the things, procedures I do with animals in my garage, that Sheriff Joe and his SWAT team would be there to bust me down. Okay, so I'm given a special kind of latitude to do work with these animals. And so it seems to me that a certain proportion of what we do now in the name of protecting the animals is really done in the name of making sure that our research remains somewhat palatable to people. So I wish we could have sort of a better way of evaluating what really matters, because I don't think all this PPE, for example, it matters that much. We could do all this protection. We're protecting our investigators, we're protecting the animals, but very nominally. And I think the animals might do a lot better if we were sort of able to release some of the PPE, go back to having contact with the animals, that kind of thing. Okay. I don't think that's really possible, though, in kind of the current environment of thinking about how the public views the sort of research we do with animals. Okay. So, but this research, you know, because in neuroprosthetics, one of the nice things being in neuroprosthetics is that it's fairly visible and people like it, because you can make this leap. You can make this sort of intuitive jump for people that says, oh, we're doing these things in monkeys. Yes, it's invasive. Yes, we have to harm monkeys. But there's this immediate application. So you can easily imagine that you can take, and here in you know, Chicago is like one of the world centers of this, right? So you can easily imagine taking these technologies, applying them to humans, and so you can have a way to have a paralyzed person, for example, interact with a computer and run a robotic arm, or run their wheelchair, or send emails, all these kinds of things. Okay, so it's very appealing to people. So, and it's appealing because it's translational, it's potentially translational. So, like a lot of people in my field, I've made an attempt to do some kind of translational sort of research. And the idea is we want to take the stuff we've been doing in monkeys, whether it's controlling robotic hands or prosthetic hands, or delivering sensation from hands, and we want to do that in humans. We want to show that this actually means something and we could do something. So, maybe 2 years ago, a physician from Pittsburgh who was very involved in this kind of research moved to Arizona and joined the Phoenix Children's Hospital. And in Phoenix Children's Hospital, one of the first things he did was set up an epilepsy monitoring unit, which is where a lot of this sort of translational componentry of this work happens. And so we set to work as quickly as we could sort of translating this. Okay, and so it's all the usual things that you hear about. So we have ECOG grids, so grids of electrodes that are lying on top of the cortex, and we can use to record brain signals, and that the patients can then modify to control devices. Or we can also play sensations into the brain to deliver somatic sensation, or we can do experiments to see how the brain processes sort of sensory motor processes of various kinds. Okay, I don't want to belabor the point of the research itself, except to say that now we have an environment where we can sort of do this thing we've been promising all along, which is start to develop these technologies in humans. Okay, so, but you note it's Phoenix Children's Hospital. We've done had experiments now with maybe 10 or so patients, and the patients have been extremely variable. So this was all great for me when I was sitting in my office and getting sent nice data plots showing that subjects could control the motion of cursors on screens, and we did this with, it was during our first experiments were during the World Cup, so we did it with soccer. And showing that the patients could engage in these games, that we could extract information from the experiments, do all kinds of really nice stuff. And of course, this is all heavily IRB approved, both with the Institutional Review Board at Phoenix Children's Hospital and the Institutional Review Board at Arizona State. And all consent forms and all this, and because it's a Phoenix Children's Hospital, adult consent forms to sign for their kids. And because it's Phoenix, the consent forms all have to have versions that are in Spanish. And so you can imagine all the sort of intricacies of this. After the fourth or fifth subject, I was able to get down to the hospital and have an interaction with one of these kids. And it was eye-opening. So the kid was all consented, the parents had agreed to the experiment, everybody seemed happy. Went down to the hospital and walked into the room, and the subject is a 4-year-old girl. So, people don't get these surgeries, of course, unless they have intractable epilepsy. So we have a 4-year-old girl with medically intractable epilepsy. She's being evaluated to have some kind of a brain resection to treat her epilepsy. She's just had a surgery, so she's got, a craniotomy with electrodes sitting on her brain. Her head's swollen, her face is swollen. She's in a very, very foul mood. And we walk in and ask if we could do some experiments, and she rolls over on the bed and says no and yells at us. We talked to her a couple times. We talked to her parents. Her parents like, oh, she's been in a bad mood all day. I'm like, well, she was in surgery yesterday. It's not too surprising. But the physician comes in, and the physician starts talking to the kid. Well, these physicians are chosen at Phoenix Children's Hospital because they're very good with kids, right? And he was amazing. He walked in. He needed to do some evaluation of the patient, of the grid locations, to figure out where the grid was, to figure out where the seizure locus was. He starts talking to the little girl, so he's very good at the brain part. He's also very good with the kids. He starts talking to the girl, and he says, well, how you doing today? Do you mind talking to us today? Pillow over her head. Huh. So I heard you got a pony, is that true? And suddenly, just a little bit turn of the head. Pretty soon, the girl's just chattering away about the ponies and riding the ponies out at this place, and she's turned back over and she's talking to the physician. And then in the course of this, pretty soon the physician's like, well, we have these guys here, they want to do this, it's just a short experiment, just maybe 5 minutes. Can we just put your hand on this thing and you just push some buttons for us? And the girl's, okay, fine, sure. And she begins, running the experiment. Okay, so it's all good. The girl is happy. She's done the experiment. We haven't done anything additionally invasive to the girl. But I have this kind of strange, queasy feeling about it. And the reason I have this queasy feeling is because I'm not really sure who's really protecting the interests of the girl. So it should be the physician, it seems to me. And I have a good relationship with the physician I work with. I think he does a really outstanding job, but there's so many pressures involved in this. So, I'm reading some of Carl's articles, or some of you may have seen this article not too long ago. And this is totally different. So this is not the pharmaceutical company. This is a medical, a hospital, a for-profit hospital that's been accused of doing unnecessary cardiac procedures, cardiac catheterizations. And with one particular physician, in fact, this article makes the claim that one particular physician, up to 50% of his cardiac procedures would have been deemed unnecessary otherwise. But he had these other pressures. He's at a profit hospital, a for-profit hospital. He's getting an award for the amount of money he's bringing into the hospital, totally separate from his patient care. So that doesn't mean his patient care is bad. It just means that there's additional pressures operating on these guys. And so for me, I look back again at kind of the IRB protections that we have as investigators and all the things that we try to do to make sure that we are in compliance, because that's really the catchword for all the sort of engagement that we have with these patients and also with the monkeys. It's all about compliance. And I once again wonder the same question. How much of the stuff that we do that's compliance, that to me should be meant to protect these subjects, make sure the subjects are chosen with care, that we don't impact their medical care, that we don't do anything harmful to them. How much of those things are compromised by having this huge sort of behemoth of a medical industry, which seems to exist mostly to make money, of course, and makes money, more money, the more people are sick. So the incentives are all kind of screwy, and so it's a little bit of a difficult area for somebody like me to navigate. My incentive is I want to get in, do research, publish papers, get grants. I have my own set of things I want to do, and it's not that the subjects aren't sort of on my mind, it's that there's a whole array of things I have to think about in evaluating how to do this research. And so it's kind of a slippery slope. So I'm here today. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm hoping to get some better insights into how we as investigators can evaluate these things and understand really what's going on. How do we really protect our subjects? How many of the things that we do are helpful? How many of the things that we do are just window dressing meant to sort of look appropriate to the outside public? I think, and that's really what I wanted to talk about today. So thank you very much.
So I have a quick question about the animal work. So you say the better surgery procedures and the PPE doesn't necessarily improve the monkey's quality of life too much. Is there anything you would think of that would be feasible to do that would actually have some sort of tangible increase? Is that what would you say, like more social interaction would be one of those things, or?
Yeah, so I think one of the crucial things is, you know, in a lot of USDA regulations now, the USDA inspectors will look for pairing, so the animals spend some time together in the cages. But in fact, you can always bypass that by arguing for various reasons, for example, implants. So we put implants on, the implants cost however many thousands of dollars to purchase, to implant and all that. And one of the critical things that happens with them, usually they last pretty well unless another animal gets a hold of them and chews the connectors off and things like that. So you can make exemptions for pair housing the animals. So I think the things which I think matter to the animals. Okay, I'm not a monkey. I am a primate though. So I know, I know that when, when I have some kind of a traumatic experience, for example, that there's a certain amount of pain associated with it, but the pain passes. And part of the things that makes the pain pass is my interactions with the people that I hang around with, my friends, my family. And so I would think that the things that we really need to do to promote welfare of the animals are things that enhance their interactions and allow them to interact. Let me go back in the room and, anybody who works with monkeys knows that periodically they get agitated and they tend to break things and throw things around if they can. So my approach has always been to walk into the room and, groom the animal for a minute, give it a little treat, say hi, pet it, talk nice to it, and that seems to calm them down. So I could do that, or I could give them a little shot of Valium. That might calm them down too, but one's maybe more medically recommended, but not necessarily better for the animals. And so I think we need to spend more time thinking about what really, really does help the animals. So.
I have a question.
Okay.
So would you recommend that a grad student like me who cares about science and cares about the ethics, what should I do in the lab on a day-to-day basis? Should I go talk to the IACUC and the IRBs about my research? Because I'm just the grad student. I'm far removed from that.
Yeah, that's a hard question because we, as the graduate students, I don't know how things are managed here at Northwestern. I know at ASU, for example, that we have high standards for PPE. And if a member of the IACUC comes into the laboratory and sees a person with a monkey and they don't have a mask on or they don't have gloves on, that person's in trouble. So graduate students can then be removed from the study pretty summarily, actually, by the IACUC in those cases. And so we have to be fairly stringent about it. So I think it's more important for the investigators to be the people who are there advocating to say, look, we had an incident with some bites. We had a person got bitten. And so the university, actually the provost office level, promulgated a new rule that nobody could go anywhere near a monkey with like a treat. So, but I'm very used to walking up to a monkey and putting a treat in his mouth, and he'll just take it very gently and eat it. Okay, so and that was an important part of the interaction that we have with the subjects, those subjects, that we need to be able to, that subject needs to trust us the same way we trust the subject, right? So I think it's important for the investigators to be the ones who are out there advocating as much as possible. It's not always possible, and it's not always fruitful, because the compliance level, the people who manage that at the universities can wield a lot of power.
I highly appreciate your being so honest about your study there. So one of my questions is, what type of study should be investigated by the researchers like you and me? I'm doing the BCI research also. So I know that for many of us, trying to using BCI to increase the quality of the life of disabled person. But I also know that there is funding to support, for example, increase the human power for the war purpose. So you put this question like, who will protect the subject? So my question related to your question is, who will protect our research money is being used in the correct direction? So any comments there?
That's a great question, and the BCI stuff is hugely funded by defense now. Those guys, DARPA loves it, and we had. They give all kinds of reasons for rehabbing soldiers and all this kind of stuff, but we had a site meeting with DARPA once, and we had a series of projects we were going to do to examine activities of daily living in people. So people with artificial hands, and we're going to have them open bottles and open doors and zip up their jacket and stuff like that. And we went through this whole list, and the DARPA guy said, "You forgot one thing." And can you guess what it was? Pulling a trigger. Yeah. So, and we're like, but then, well, that's a lifestyle choice. I mean, these are soldiers, they like shooting guns, they want to go out, and that's part of their activities of daily living, I guess. So, but this is a great question. So how do we evaluate where our research dollars are going to come from? And does it make a difference if the money comes from DARPA or from NIH in terms of the outcomes of the research? It's probably debatable. I can guess what the funders want out of it. That may not necessarily be what develops in the long run, but people have to make their own choices about those things. And there's a whole sort of line of questions about using soldiers for subjects. That's a whole other level of protecting subjects. But you're totally right. I mean, my goal here is to protect my research. And I got into, I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's not a very good one, but the reason I got interested in ethics in the first place was because I saw something with in the animal lab that I thought had the potential to jeopardize my research. And so that's how I got sort of interested in this whole issue. How do we protect our subjects, and what do we really do to make sure that the research is done in an effective way, and to produce publications, to produce real outcomes from the research.
So your last comment about having seen something, there definitely is a lot of personal responsibility, I think, that's associated with all this, both what we are doing as investigators, and then what other people are doing, grant reviews, that type of thing. But one of the things you had mentioned before was when you worked with the young girl, that you kind of went back and looked at your IRB and who is protecting this patient. And my question is, based on that, and and our need to sort of keep an eye on ourselves on what we're doing, was there anything that you changed with respect to how your IRB was submitted, or how that patient interaction is being conducted now?
No, actually, but I did. For me, it was like a cautionary tale, because I'm not in any position to evaluate sort of clinical needs of people. I'm trained as a neuroscientist, not as a neurosurgeon. I can't make those evaluations. So I think the thing that's incumbent upon me in this particular instance is making sure that I can trust the physician I'm working with, because that's the person who's making those evaluations. And so, you know, we want to avoid being tied in our research to people like this who are doing unnecessary procedures for whatever reasons those might be. You know, I mean, they could be financial, they could be doing unnecessary procedures for research. That's entirely possible. So I think that's the thing that's incumbent upon us, and that's what I spent a fair bit of time sort of thinking about and talking to my physician colleague about is, how do I navigate this terrain where I'm really not an expert, and I have to trust that he's going to be doing the right thing for the patients.
Any other questions?
I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but when you saw that 4-year-old girl, can you articulate what it was that made you so uncomfortable at that point? I mean, I think I heard it, but that seems to me that that's the sign that you were experiencing an ethical dilemma at that point, personally, professionally. There was something that you saw that made you uncomfortable, and I look at that as a red flag issue of, okay, now it may have been for you as your role as a neuroscientist. I mean, you've drawn the lines, but can you talk a little bit about what it was that triggered that?
Well, I think the thing that triggered it was that I've been used to sitting in my office looking at these plots and analyzing them, and this is how I thought of the subjects, right? I thought of them as the things that produced these plots for me and that would make papers. Okay. And when I walked into the hospital room and I saw this child, I realized that, it was like Carl was saying, these are actual people who have actual lives and, real parents with real concerns. And in this particular case, I'd say the parents were pretty uneducated, so I don't know how much they could evaluate things. I don't know how, obviously the girl couldn't evaluate anything. And so it was just kind of a shock to me. I think it was the first time that it was very vivid to me, recognizing that the subjects of my experiments are human beings that have big holes in their head and their brains are sick and they're not feeling well. And, this is an important part of sort of understand that I should make sure that I'm not doing anything that's participating in not doing the right thing by this child.
See,
I think that was it.
I think that experience should be built into the training and education of biomedical engineers. Bring them down to the clinic and let them see what the effects are, because there may be something you can do about your array and how it's implanted and how long it's implanted, and you don't know until you start seeing it at that level.
I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to actually double up on that a little bit. So I think it's really crucial for students in my field to be in the clinic to see what really happens. Because it's very easy to sit in the bioengineering labs and concoct a device that's really cool and has all these characteristics, but not have any understanding of what the patient really needs, what the physician really needs. But there's a flip side to that too, which is that those students are, they're not trained to evaluate ethical matters, not at all. And so, and I'm not convinced that, some of the courses that we've delivered so far, really do that job. And I think we need better ways to inculcate that kind of ethical way of thinking in the people who are doing the engineering as well.
I think that's a great lead-in into our afternoon session on how to teach ethics to engineers and other students. But before then, we should probably eat. And before that, we should thank Steve.